like for example, my friend, she's Chinese Canadian, and her employer just couldn't see her as a typical foreigner, an expat. They just saw Asian. You can't possibly be an English teacher because you're Asian. I wonder if like Koreans focus too much on the bloodline thing, on the Asianness rather than the individual who happens to be Asian.
It is, the bloodline thing is definitely a topic. I mean, I don't know if it was malicious or if it was just clumsiness, but I had a teacher say right to me that they don't like mixing of the blood, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, do you realize who you're talking to right now? I'm mixed, I mean, so I just I ignored it, but I'm like, I work here, but it's funny because, I mean, if you break it down, I mean, the whole purity of bloodlines and stuff in any nation is arguable.
Right.
It's
definitely
arguable. I mean, here, even in Korea, I mean, I'm not a history major. I have no substantiated reason for saying this, but the first thing that would come to my mind is Korea was occupied by Japan.
Right, they were invaded by many countries.
By many countries.
Several times. Right.
So take Japan, for instance, or China or something like that.
Or the Mongol.
Or the Mongols.
I mean, in Jeju-do, I lived 2 years in Jeju-do, and I met so many Mongolians who looked Korean. And here's the irony with that. When I approached my Korean friends, I'm like, wow, Mongolians, you guys resemble each other a lot. And she's almost took pride in that. She's like, yeah, we look very similar. Had I said she looked similar to Chinese, it's completely different reaction.
Or Japanese.
Because
that's a good point, because to the untrained eye, like a foreigner, Japanese culture, Korean culture have so many similarities, much more than to China, for instance. Which would make sense, because actually Korea and Japan are like, I don't want to say offspring, but they're tied into China historically.
Oh, good.
So there's similarities between Japan and Korea, but you don't ever want to say that, right?
Nope.
It's okay, like you say, "Wow, there's so many you look so similar to somebody Mongolian." Kosher. But I made the mistake of saying that one time. I said, yeah, there's just so many similarities there, and they were just, I could see that it was not sitting well with them.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. I mean, they have their history and all that kind of stuff.
And superiority, inferiority complex, and
right. So that whole thing about bloodline and all that kind of stuff, I overlook it a little bit just because. I mean, I'm from America, and it's a big mixture there.
Yeah, it's a big mixture, and it's fascinating. That conversation is still similar with African Americans and Africans. There's a similar dichotomy there, primarily because we call ourselves, for the most part, African Americans. Now, what do you call an African who moves to America? Aren't they also African Americans? But it's a cultural heritage label. It's not necessarily. Of course, we're all from Africa, from the continent, but it's a cultural label, not necessarily a bloodline label. And I think people fail to realize that if I can't just go to a country in Africa and say, "Hey, I'm one of you."
Right.
No, I can't go to Senegal and do that. I can't go to Benin. I can't go to Somalia. I can't go to any of these countries and say, "Hey, I'm one of you." Because we are culturally different.
Right.
And I think there's a huge pride in that. Regardless if you love humanity and say that we are all one and we all sit under the rainbow, the socio-political aspect of it's the degree is much higher.
Right. That's a good point too, because it's good that you think that you think that way. I get a lot of emails and stuff through YouTube from people that. And comments, and they bring that up. Asian Americans or people from Canada or the UK or something like that. And especially Koreans, maybe a lot of the pain that some of them experience is because they had the expectation that they were just going to be like one of the good old boys in
Right.
Korea, you know, and that they were just going to be like, yep, you're just like one of us down to the roots, and that's just not the case, you know. You know, they have their own thing going on here. They have their own good old boys, and
Right.
the roots of their thing goes down, and it's just because they've spent so much time together. And
Right.
hey, it's amazing. You know, a lot of them are maybe a little more welcoming to me because I'm Korean. Like in my case, that's how I look at it. I know that they're never going to share the intimate details of what goes on in the
culture,
conversations
in
and the
conversation,
culture about the
right.
realness of the life that they're living here in this country.
Right.
So, you know, and they may need to shut me out once in a while. You
Yeah.
know, and they have, and it doesn't bother me. It's
Right.
like if I'm back home in America and, you know, hey, I'm born and raised in America, and but it's not like I'm gonna be able to go into a pool hall in Alabama
Right.
and be like, hey guys, what's going on?
How
It's
you
Tom."
doing? How y'all doing?
Right.
Like, who are you?
The needle will scratch across the record.
What's up with this China man
Yeah,
doing?
exactly. And I'm like, I think I took a wrong turn somewhere.
And that was a horrible accent, by the way. I'm sorry.
Right.
Um,
But that's a good point. You know, so I think a lot of people have that expectation, and
yeah, definitely. And to segue on the bloodline thing, how do you think that affects dating? Have you ever dated a Korean girl who sort of looked at your North Korean ancestry as positive or negative, or